This is a story about inspiration and adversity.
Belief that what we do transcends the human condition.
This is a story about a story.
This is a story about what did and didn't come together in spite of the odds. Let us tell you a story of a great adventure.
On September 27, 1930, a Norwegian fishing trawler hunting for seals landed on Victoria Island in Norway and found the final campsite of 3 bodies. One was buried, one was propped up against a rock, and the third one was discovered inside a makeshift shelter. The fishing trawler crew mentioned in their notes that it was odd that these men perished there because there was evidence of food, fuel provisions, and, as I mentioned, a shelter. There were 2 other discoveries that were mentioned by the crew. First off, multiple rolls of undeveloped film and 3 diaries. Each diary was unique and revealed characteristics of each of the men. The first diary, discovered on the body of the man seated on the rock, was packed in straw and placed in his breast pocket. The second diary contained only love letters to a single woman. And the third diary reflected navigation, wind measurements, star charts, longitude, and latitude. Here's an excerpt from the first diary. It is not a little strange to be floating here above the polar sea, to be the first to have floated here in a balloon. I cannot deny that all 3 of us are dominated by a feeling of pride. We think we can well face death, having done what we have done. Isn't it all perhaps the expression of an extremely strong sense of individuality, which cannot bear the thought of living and dying like a man in the ranks, forgotten by coming generations? Is this ambition? Clearly, this is a journal entry about legacy. He even describes justifying how death is a fair trade for their efforts. This man was Solomon Andrée. The second diary were all letters to a woman whose name was Anna. Here's an excerpt. We had a little mishap at the start when crossing from one ice floe to the next. The first sledge went crooked and fell in. I jumped down into the water and held fast the sledge so that it would not sink. It was with difficulty that it was saved. André was angry that I should have taken such a risk. Of course, he did not know that in the sledge is my sack with all your letters and your portrait. Well, my dear, what will you be thinking all winter? That is my only anxiety. There is much I should write about, but now I must sleep. Good night. This man was Nils Strindberg, and this writing was to his fiancée, Anna, who he would never see again. The third diary is from a mysterious character whose name was Knut Frankel. Frankel, I measured the winds and I charted the stars, and I asked myself over and over again what attracted me to the north like the trembling needle of a compass. Was it only for this? To perish alone amid the howling winds of an Arctic night, reading and rereading these indeliverable love letters that have faded, and the faded journal of a prideful Swede. So mysterioso. But when the film was developed and the diaries deciphered, it became more of a complete idea of the identity and fate of these 3 men: Solomon André, Nils Strindberg, and Knut Frankel. 3 Swedes who had set out 30 years earlier in a hot air balloon. The return of their bodies, the diaries, and film answered a question that Swedes everywhere had longed for over a quarter of a century. It was clear that their exploration had in fact become a trip into the unknown.
On July 11th, 1897, these 3 Swedish explorers set out to traverse the Arctic by air. André had designed a hydrogen balloon that he called the Eagle and equipped it with ample supplies for more than they would need for their journey. They anticipated that their trek by air would last about 10 days, after which they would descend into San Francisco to great fanfare and acclaim. They even brought their tuxedos with them for the festivities that they expected. However, 3 days into the journey, the balloon became encrusted with ice and could no longer be controlled. The weight of the ice caused the balloon to sink, descend, and eventually crash on the rugged polar terrain. The men tried for months to make their way back to civilization on foot, setting up encampments, moving about their supplies. But eventually that determination gave way to madness, and madness to death. In our story, first Strindberg, then Andrée, leaving Knut Frankel alone on the ice to keep recording his scientific observations in his journal until he too perished. Did Andrée actually believe that this ragtag team of aviators would succeed in this improbable quest to cross the Arctic by air? Was he blinded by his faith in the technological innovations that he created for navigating a balloon? Or did he know full well that he was condemning his compatriots to an untimely death on the ice? All we know is what we can read between the lines of the fragments of the journal clutched in his freezing hands.
Oops. That worked. I'm so glad. The late Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, Dominick Argento, was a master at text painting, and he used non-traditional texts. So, of course, these 3 diaries were a perfect source material for a piece that he created called the Andrée Expedition, which was a song cycle that's about 35 minutes long of 13 different arias. Argento says that for me, all music begins where speech stops. And what we're going to listen to right now is an excerpt from the Andrée Expedition. This is Nils Strindberg's last letter to Anna. I just want to point out that the tessitura in this is very high for a baritone, especially when he sings about returning to her. And then it's in the strongest part of his voice when he sings to comfort her. This music is so lush and romantic. This is an excerpt from the Andrée Expedition titled Last Letter to Anna, and it's sung by the American baritone Michael Kieldy. And I hope to God this works. Okay, we're going to go back to Argento. Peter will now sing.
Go back 2 and then go forward 1.
So we're going to go back.
Go back 1 more.
And 1 more.
And now go forward.
First and foremost, I must congratulate you, for this is your birthday. Oh, how I wish I could tell you that I am in excellent health, and that you need not fear for us at all.
At the center of the piece, Argento posed 2 dramatic questions. What did Andrée really know, and what were the chances of success? And what happened between the time that Strindberg and Andrée died and Frankel's death? He wove all of this into an intimate music and dramatic glimpse into the uncertain explorer within all of us.
So who are we,
Yeah.
and why are we here?
How did we get here?
How did we get here?
Well, first off, I want to introduce you to Michael Kieldy, who is not here today because he's singing at the Metropolitan Opera, so it's a fairly reasonable excuse not to be here. Michael has established himself as one of America's and honestly the world's most accomplished baritones. He was a Met winner in 1995. Most recently, he sang Rigoletto at the Metropolitan Opera and will be returning for the 22-23 season, performing the role of Rigoletto again. Michael is a brilliant teacher, he is a brilliant coach, he is a brilliant singer, and he is a fantastic colleague. And this is another quick excerpt of Michael singing from a production that we did in Vermont. We set the opera of the Andrée Expedition in an abandoned marble quarry. And this is when Nils Strindberg describes to Anna about making dinner for André and Frankel. The piece is called Dinner Aloft. I can't simply overstate the importance of someone of his caliber who participated in this project singing this role. I also can't overstate the importance of Peter's contribution.
So I'm Peter Torpey, and I'm a media experience artist, and I actually got, my background is in film and theater and computer science, which I cultivated once upon a time in my years as an undergraduate at the University of Arizona. These days, I create lighting, projection, media designs for live performance, operas. I do interactive installation work as well as online virtual experiences. A through line of my work has been thinking about how do we represent presence in works of art? How does that connect us? And whether that presence is an audience being aware of each other or the dynamic between audience and performer. How can technology and abstraction serve to bridge different modalities, to bridge the connection and act as a translator among all of us and among the arts to us?
My name is Cynthia Stokes, as you can tell, this picture. And my background originally started in music. I moved into theater, into creating new opera, traditional opera, experimental opera, and then to form my own company that did only site-specific work. I think that it's such an exciting experience for an audience member and also for performers to come upon an opera experience. And that as I'm now starting to work more in digital, it's really created this entirely new, exciting opportunity for me. The center of all of my work is about developing community and how through the arts we have these opportunities to see ourselves in new ways. Also, it's very important, obviously, since I'm teaching, that to encourage the artists and the audience of the future is also a very important part of my work. This is an example of a site-specific installation that I did at ENR2 in Tucson, Arizona, and we flew singers. It was insane.
So we're a team. We're a trio of collaborators on this process, and actually our collaboration began working on a production of the Andrée Expedition in 2017 in Vermont. And we found that we shared a common interpretation of the story and reveled in Argento's tragically beautiful telling of it. And we felt the need to find other ways of sharing that story with a larger audience and getting it out there in the world. We've worked together, and we're always inspiring each other. The process of creating theater is one of responding to what each of us does from our, we're all looking at it from a different vantage point, whether that's musical drama or virtuosic performance or visual storytelling. We see what each other does, and we respond to it, and the work is always evolving. And the world of the Andrée Expedition was created first by André's ambition. It's a true story. And it's built up by Argento. And we're creating it again through our collaboration.
But then
the
pandemic
global
hit.
pandemic.
Yeah, the world crashed down around us. And we realized that we actually were in this strangely weird, similar position to Andrée and the guys who were out on the ice. There we were, 3 people lost and alone, unable to complete our destiny. We were out on the ice in our own way, floating, uncertain. We kept promising ourselves to clean our houses, to Maria Kondo things. We were binge watching Netflix, day drinking, eating Nutella out of a jar. Yeah, okay, we know. But then we realized that perhaps there was something in the haze of all of this that could emerge. And there it was, that need, that feeling, that relentless struggle, I think, that all artists and so many other people felt during the pandemic, this feeling of a need to create. And Peter asked me a really important question. He said, what do we have at our disposal to make work? And that became the beginning of Andrée 360.
Andrée 360. It sounds like virtual reality.
Yeah, except it was not Zoom.
Not Zoom.
It could not be Zoom.
But is it film? Is it theater?
Ooh.
Video games?
Yeah, well, kind of.
Well, yeah, maybe it's something entirely different.
Maybe it is.
Virtual reality, it gives us the opportunity to tell stories in a way that we don't normally do when we're creating theater in our regular work. Normally we're putting on a show for an audience filled with people. But in virtual reality, we're performing for an audience of one, the audient. That empowers that individual to have a certain kind of agency in their experience. At the very least, they get to choose their vantage. They get to look around. We're surrounding them with an environment which then makes them a participant of the story. They are given a role by virtue of being in the world of our story. And this kind of work will probably impact greatly how we create theater in the future, too.
So at that point, with Peter's, with this collaborative idea, we did what any normal person would do. We put down the Nutella and applied for a grant for the Arizona Commission on the Arts, which we received, as well as some support for our Provost Initiative Fund, which has supported a digital and performing arts lab that I run. And the thing that I want to just say is that the power of a little bit of money and a really good idea takes us a really long way. And I think that that's been the central theme for all of this, that the idea was a big one and that the technology had to be a tool to support that idea. And if it wasn't that, then we had no business doing it. It was just technology for technology's sake. So we found that this great idea inspired all of us. We used an Instapro 360 and cameras, green screens, and digital media to create an immersive experience for an audience of one who was wearing the Oculus headset. So I'm just going to ask you now to imagine an operatic experience that begins with a pianist and Newt Frankel alone on the ice, reading and rereading the diaries and asking himself and asking us, how did he get here? As we know, the dates of Andrée and Frankel's deaths were fairly clear in the diaries. Of Andrée and Strindberg's deaths were very clear in the diaries. But Frankel could have been out on the ice for a really long time. We just don't know. And this notion was so compelling to me, the idea of a repeated day again and again as he waited for his own demise. What if the audience came upon the pianist and Frankel floating together on the ice pack, to be like Frankel, suspended in time, suspended in space? And to me, that was the most compelling thing. I just want to show you this silent moment that is an excerpt from Andrée. Michael plays all 3 of the characters, and so we had to mash together any number of things. So this is a sweet little example of Michael. There's Peter. Trying to be very serious. And when you see the VR production, you'll see this little excerpt from the beginning of it. Taking himself as Andrée very seriously, and then looking at his diary. Okay. The next thing I want to do is show you what actually the footage itself looks like through a VR headset. And Peter, you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so this is the view from the camera. The camera is comprised of multiple lenses that capture the environment in 360, and then they get stitched together. They get stitched together, and the way we had to shoot it, because of the space that we had, was in 180 degrees. So we actually staged Michael on the face of a clock. We did all the blocking as if he were at 6 o'clock and going up to 2 o'clock and whatnot. And then, you can do the next.
Oh, the goggles.
Sorry.
I'm moving on?
No, just the next slide. Yeah. So
Oh,
the face of a
thank
clock. Yeah. And then we shot it at 180 degrees at a time, and then we can position every 6-hour segment of that into correct alignment in post-production. So really thinking about how to layer the 3 different versions of Michael that we're capturing. The green screen helps us do that.
I was just going to ask you if you could tell everybody about how long it took to create all of that.
Oh, well, processing all of the footage is, I can't even tell you how many hours go into doing something like that. But even what we're doing now with the state that the technology is in is pretty demanding in terms of computational resources and storage. So we're shooting at an 8K resolution that's over 8,000 pixels by 8,000 pixels. But we're going out to the headset in a 4K resolution, so it's a bit smaller. But even then, we're talking about 400 megabytes per second of video for the 3 tracks of Michael playing each part. Then we have to go through, capture that, process that, key out the green screen, layer the video, spatialize the audio sources that we recorded to match the positions in the video, and then build up the virtual environments. The green screen allows us to virtually create the worlds and transform it as much as we would in theater. We don't have the language of film to make a cut or to choose the framing, because the audience can see everything in the environment. We have to, like theater, we have to transform it before your eyes. If we're going to a different place or a different mood, that transition has to happen in front of you, and the virtual environments allow us to do that. Those environments then have to be modeled, textured, rendered, lit, and then composited with the live action footage. And that's kind of at the stage that we're at now. So if you look at the VR bar where we have our headsets with the prologue of this, you'll see a draft of that prologue segment with all of those elements combined, and we're in the process of doing that for the rest of the show.
So this prototype offers an audience member the opportunity to experience art wherever they want to, whenever they want to. Peter, this method of producing work is going to have an impact on how we deliver content in the future, right?
Absolutely. I think that the lessons that we've learned from doing this will feed back into our own theatrical work that we'll continue to do as well. And VR as a medium will surely influence Hollywood, influence stagecraft, just as cinema and theater have influenced what we conceive of as virtual reality.
One of the things that we talked about a while ago was this idea that when they first started making movies, they shot them like it was a play. And so I think that this is also another aspect of how our understanding and how to use this medium that really was originally for gaming is going to really become something that is exciting for any adventurous audience member.
When we're
yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
This is my favorite part. For me as an artist, I think that finding a way to inspire myself frequently requires a certain amount of terror. That kind of terror that you have when you look at something that you absolutely don't know how to do, and you decide that you're going to run toward it. And this project was absolutely that for me. I have a 9-year-old great nephew who has learned more about VR in 12 weeks of having a headset than I will ever know in my life. But I took the risk for a couple of reasons. One is that I trust my team. The second was that I have an absolute and utter belief in the idea of what this story is. The project was in every way about a challenge for my own artistic comfort. One of the learning curves that I had was, first off, as we said, that this technology is only useful when it supports the big idea, but also how quiet the director has to be during filming, because I'm an opera director. Opera is loud, and so you're always muttering to yourself, but you can see this little image of me and Peter behind the camera. Maybe?
Left.
Oh, go left. Anyway, we're behind the camera, and we have to be absolutely quiet, which was so hard for me, and I kept getting yelled at because I was like, rah, 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 and they were like, it's picking up. I think for Michael, one of the biggest things was that it was very much a chopped up experience for him, that he would run a line of one of the character tracks, and then he'd run a line for one of the other character tracks.
And that he can't see most of the environment, the scenery. He's playing against himself, who's not there, and a world that is not there.
And it was 104 degrees in Tucson in August when we filmed this.
And he was dressed for the Arctic.
Right. This is a story about how love persists. We wanted to tell you a little bit about the end of the story of Andrée and his team, and also talk to you a little bit about the future of our project. When the guys' bodies were returned to Sweden, Anna, who was Nils Strindberg's beloved, actually was still alive, and she had the opportunity to read the diaries that he had written 30 years before. And the one diary the one photograph that's over here is deteriorated, but it was definitely in with his things. She requested that when she die, her heart be removed from her body and entombed with him in Sweden. So ultimately they were able to be together.
And on July 11th, 2021, we were just about to start filming for this project. And that's about 124 years to the day that our trio of Swedes took to flight. We came across an article that had a tidbit about the Andrée Expedition that we hadn't known previously. And it was that one of Nils Strindberg's aims in his photographic documentation of the journey was to go back to Sweden and create a panoramic or diorama of what it was like on the North Pole so that other people could experience what he experienced on his journey. So in that regard, we're following in his footsteps. This is our story.
Yeah, and that's our story. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, we'd love to talk to you guys about that.